everybody. My name's Emily. Thank you so much for letting me come and share today. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? I panicked in that last song that my microphone was already on, and I was like, oh no, you really don't want to hear my singing voice, so hopefully it wasn't on. First of all, is any of you guys familiar with the ministry of 20 schemes? Maybe just put your hands up if you've heard. You guys are, hopefully. So maybe a couple of people put their hands up, most of you aren't. So what I'm planning to do this evening is just give a bit of a background of what 20 Schemes is, what the ministry is all about, what the vision is, what the Lord's doing in Scotland. Hopefully that can encourage you with the work that God's doing in Scotland. And then I want to share a little bit about how I'm involved in the ministry and what the Lord's kind of doing in my life, and then we're going to leave the last little bit, hopefully, if I don't talk too much, we'll leave the last 10 minutes or so for questions. So if you do have questions, or if you can't understand my English accent, shout out actually if you can't understand me. But yeah, if you have questions, if there's things that don't make sense, then feel free to keep them till the end, and hopefully we can have just a bit of discussion and question and answer time at the end. But for those of you who are trying to pinpoint what my accent is, I actually am from England, so I'm from the north of England, a little city called York. But 20 Schemes, the ministry of 20 Schemes is based in Scotland, so I don't have a Scottish accent. I'm a fake, unfortunately. We do have a couple of videos, so you will get to hear a nice broad Scottish accent, which has subtitles along the bottom to help us understand. So basically, just to start off, the ministry of 20 Schemes, the vision statement for 20 Schemes is bringing the light of the gospel to Scotland's schemes through church planting and revitalisation. I'll just see, I think that might be on, let me go forward, see if this clicker works. We're going to come back to that. Or as it says here, it's gospel churches for Scotland's schemes. So to basically help you understand that, I'll explain what a scheme is. Because it is very new language, I think, for most of us here. It was new language for me. When I moved from England to Scotland, I didn't know what a scheme was, or I didn't know before when I was growing up. So a scheme is basically a housing area, a low-income community that houses people. It tends to be government housing, so it's kind of similar to the projects in the States. But also there is differences from the projects, maybe a little bit of a mix between the projects and trailer parks, in the sense that people live in the schemes for generations. They're very multi-generational communities. So you tend to find schemes all over Scotland. In England, we call the schemes a council estates. So if I slip into saying council estates, I mean schemes. It's the same thing. But basically they're communities that have very high percentage of addiction and retreat and deprivation, a lot of drug and alcohol addiction in these communities. There would be 52% single parent families in the schemes, and a real sense of hopelessness often. Often in these areas is a real high crime rate, and so they're kind of the communities that, although they have a great history and there's a real richness to the schemes because people live in there for generations, you often don't move out of the schemes. You are born there, you have grandparents, great-grandparents living in these communities. They're very hard hit with a lot of social issues. But basically the biggest, I'm going to show a video in a minute, but the biggest issue and need within the schemes is the lack of gospel witness in these communities. So we'll go on to talk about this a little bit more, but basically in the whole of Scotland, they did a statistic recently, and it says it's 1.8% evangelical Christian in the whole of Scotland. There's a statistic that said that you can find 3, broadly speaking, evangelical churches for every 10,000 people in the whole of Scotland. But when you zoom into the schemes, these are often forgotten communities. People don't really want to move into the schemes. And as I said, people aren't moving out of the schemes. And it's actually 0.5% evangelical Christian within the schemes of Scotland. The same statistic said that you can find it's 0.3 churches for every 10,000 people which kind of doesn't make sense, but basically it's saying that there's very, very, very few gospel preaching churches in these communities. So it's kind of crazy to think about Scotland, because if you know some of the history of Scotland and the Reformation, and you know all that kind of stuff, and John Knox, if those names are ringing a bell, then Scotland was once known the land of the book, and it's gone very far from that. And especially it's not just 20 schemes that are saying that. When you zoom in and you look at the statistics, especially the need is within these communities, there's few people hearing the gospel and hearing about Jesus. I'm going to show a 3-minute video because I don't want to talk the whole night. It'll break it up a little bit. This is basically an overview video of the ministry of 20 schemes. Hopefully just gives you a bit of a feel for just what it's like with images and pictures, and also just what work's going on there, and then I'll get back up and carry on talking. So let's see. I'm going to go back. Oh, sorry. Cool.
Whole generations are being lost because they're living and dying without any access to or real understanding of the gospel. And I think that's a crime.
So 20 schemes exist to bring the light of the gospel to the schemes of Scotland. The driving force behind 20 schemes is God's heart for the poor. It's that God has a heart that yearns for and loves and moves towards those who are the least, the last, and the lost. And we see that displayed perfectly in the person of the Son, who was the friend of tax collectors and sinners.
Everybody always asks me, what's a scheme? I mean, there's hundreds of schemes in Scotland, and every single one of them looks different. It's home. It's just home for people who are in very difficult circumstances and many times trying to just survive in life.
I mean, the problem is simple. There are very, very few Christians living in Scotland's poorest communities. The best mercy ministry for our poorest communities is a healthy local church. That's where they can come together, that's where they can grow, and they're going to see the gospel lived out in a context and a culture that they understand.
The challenge for people who are coming to faith in these schemes is it costs. They might have to turn their back on a huge proportion of their family and their friendship group. And that means that if the cost for them becoming Christian is high, the input and availability of a Christian community needs to be equally as high. We need gospel communities who are taking light into this deep darkness and are taking hope and putting it within reach of people as churches come. And don't just share the gospel, but share life so many people.
God calls us to faithfully preach the word. When he miraculously saves, we're asked to disciple. And so people should be part of that. Find one of our clients and get intentionally involved, praying for and giving to them financially and being part of their lives.
We do need pastors. We do need mature Christians who love to teach the Bible. We need them desperately. We do need them right like 20-somethings to fork over a year out and maybe come and spend it with a pastor in a struggling church or a housing scheme. You could move. Why don't you move into a scheme and just be a good, solid encouragement and a church member and help disciple people? So there's various ways people can come. The point is, come.
Cool. I did realise as that video was playing that there's no subtitles. So hopefully you're able to catch majority of that. It wasn't too hard without the subtitles. But yeah, basically, I mean, that was a video that was made last year, I think. And there was a really big push in that video to invite people to come. I'll share a little bit more about that later, the Pray, Give, Come. But there is a great need, I'm going to come on to talk about that, there's a great need that the Lord is working in these communities and churches are being planted and churches are being revitalised, and there's a lot of very small dying churches that are reaching out and asking for help. But actually one of the greatest needs at the minute is people to go and people to go and move into those communities and share Jesus. So that's something that you can remember to pray for, and if you want to come, then you're welcome to. I'm doing my last little end bit too soon. I should be asking you that right at the end. But yeah, just a little bit more kind of on the background and the context of the scheme. So this is quite a staggering quote from 2023, so a recent quote. It says that Scotland continues to have the highest drug death rate in the whole of Europe. And as I said before, it's often within the schemes that you see very high drug and alcohol addiction and high drug death rates, which means that the average life expectancy within the schemes is a lot lower than you would find in the rest of the more affluent areas in Scotland. And this is quite staggering, but that's 40% of Scotland live in a scheme, which is a huge percentage of people within the whole of Scotland that are in these areas. If you're interested in all the history of like the schemes, then we can talk more about that afterwards. But basically, what you tend to find is like it's a bit different from the projects, that the city centres would have back in the day, they would have like made these schemes all around the edge of the city, and it would have been very like working class communities. And then obviously when a lot of the industry kind of died out, it's gone to benefit class, and it means that people within these schemes are kind of trapped in a sense that they can't move back into the city, but they're within these communities. So that's kind of a little bit about how the schemes began. Let's see. Don't know if this is working or... so yeah, basically that's a little bit of the context. Hopefully that's given you just a bit of a picture of what the schemes are like. The need in these areas is great. As it says here, that Scotland's schemes have been left in the dark. It's quite staggering when you see the need that's there with the deprivation, addiction and retreat. But if we go on to the next slide, it says that we as Christians, we know that Jesus is the answer. We know that there is hope through the Lord Jesus, and 20 Schemes as a ministry is basically wanting to plant and to revitalise local churches within these communities. It doesn't want, there's churches that are coming, being planted all over in the affluent areas of city centres, but as I said before, people from the schemes don't travel, and so they're not likely to travel out of their communities to hear the good news of Jesus. So we believe that the church, us as Christians, are called to go, and we're called to go and move in and live in these communities and plant churches and see the gospel of Jesus flourishing and transforming lives in these areas. I love this verse so much. It says, "I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And that's what we see all over the world. I know that you guys as a church here I've heard great things and are very mission-minded, and I think it's just encouraging to see that God is keeping this promise, that he is building his church all over the world. And I'm just here to encourage you that this is happening, even in the Schemes of Scotland, that God's building his church and lives are being changed. And it's a hard ministry, it's a long-term ministry, but there is so many signs of the Lord at work, and not just individuals, but families and communities being transformed. And it's just, that fills me with so much hope and so much confidence to get back, to go back to Scotland and be bold in sharing the gospel, because we know that Jesus is building his church and he's going to build his church. I'm going to skip past that. So the way that it kind of works in terms of like practicalities of 20 schemes. So what tends to happen is a scheme is kind of identified in some senses. There's a lot of different stories of how this can happen. So it might be that there's already a church in that area that's dying out. That's where a lot of the revitalization comes in. Or it might be that a scheme is kind of identified. It's maybe a scheme that there's just completely no gospel witness in. And then church planting teams are sent into these schemes. They tend to be, if it's a church plant, it's through another like bigger church that is sending a team. And so in the very early days, the way that it looks like is a church planter, a male church planter, and often a women's gospel worker, which is my role. I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. But they will tend to move in and live in these communities. We know that that's the best way to reach these schemes is not driving in and out and doing handouts, but it's actually moving in, building trust, building relationships within these communities. And as it says here, just being intentional in the community. I'll come on to explain that the big vision and prayer for 20 schemes, that it's local Indigenous people from these communities that are being saved and discipled and trained to lead the churches in their own communities. And that's happening, and praise the Lord that that's happening. But it also does take people coming from outside and moving in and being willing to kind of give their lives to live in these areas and share Jesus. I'm going to do that so we know when we're going on to the next slide. So yeah, it's very like non-complex ministry strategy, the same as every single church. I think there's nothing new that I'm sharing today, but the idea is that it's, we're sharing Jesus, sharing the Bible through evangelism, through discipleship and through training and equipping. I love it how Sharon said in that video, she said, we're called to faithfully share the gospel, and when God saves people, we're called to disciple them and to train them and equip them. And so that's basically, it's nothing that is really that special. Do you know what I mean? It's just all like what the Bible tells us to do. So in terms of like evangelism, that looks like all sorts of different things. A lot of it in the very early days is, here's some pictures actually from the church plant that I was part of in Edinburgh. So a lot of it in the early days is getting involved in things that are already going on in the community. So there's all sorts of community kind of stuff happening within the schemes, whether that's the gym, the local gym, or like gardening clubs, or there's community centres that will like have different knitting groups and all sorts of different things. And so we'll try and like just be an intentional part of that community, just live in everyday life. So yeah, a lot of it is through like building relationships with neighbours and all sorts of different things. But then also like through, as a church plant or a church planting team, we'll do specific outreach. So whether that's maybe inviting people to come to like kids clubs, or different like, there's all sorts of different things. Community meals is quite big. We'll have like, just put a load of food on, invite people in and share the gospel. And then a lot of Bible studies, one-to-one Bible studies, and just being prayerful that we can use our time and our efforts to share Jesus with people. And then when people get saved, it's an exciting opportunity to disciple. As one of the guys said in that video, a lot of the people from these communities, they've lived there their whole lives, and it's, their whole family, like it's literally like their whole family in these areas. And many people that I've been discipling have had a very hard time since coming to Christ. Maybe, I don't know any of your backgrounds here, so maybe some of you guys can relate to this as well, but friends, family members have kind of cut them out of their life because they're wanting to follow Jesus. They think that they're part of a cult, and they don't understand their choices now to, get rid of the drugs and get clean and run to Jesus. It's like their whole life is being transformed. And that's where the guy in the video is saying that we have a need as a local church to be in each other's lives, not just once a week, and not just, turn up on a Sunday and then don't see each other during the week, but that kind of daily, I guess it's a lot of what it talks about in Acts, daily living together and reading the Bible together and eating meals together, being in each other's homes. And then we also try and train people. So if there's people that maybe the Lord's saving in these communities that you can see they have specific gifts in ministry, maybe that's like in becoming a church planter in the future or a women's worker, then we do specific like training and equipping. We'll take people on as interns, and so typically people will come on as an intern for 2 years, local people, and within that time it's a time for them to basically get trained in theology and in serving, and gives an opportunity just to prayerfully seek like where the Lord's leading them for the future. There's a high percentage of unemployment within the schemes. So many people that come on as interns, like it might be their first official job that they've ever worked in their whole life. But it's a great opportunity for them to have intensive kind of discipleship, and whether that's being led into full-time ministry or whether that's being led into back into work or whatever it is, you know, just encouraging them in their home. It's an opportunity for them to grow in biblical discipleship. So a way that some of this training happens is through something called Ragged School of Theology. So this is every Wednesday, people get together, and it's basically like seminary, but out in the context of the scheme. So it means we've got quite a number of guys who are teaching, and so people can come and they learn theology, and they're able to do different exams and all that kind of stuff. But I think the great thing about Ragged is that it's very contextualized. So many people from the schemes that are being saved, they haven't completed high school, they haven't had further education, so it'd actually be really difficult for them to go to seminary. And also, it's kind of plucking them out of their context and putting them in a very different context. So that's why Ragged's just a great opportunity for them within the context of their own communities to be trained and, to be discipled. And then for me, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but my specific role within 20 Schemes is working with women and children. So my kind of, I don't know what like title is, I don't know what you call it, but I would say I'm a women's worker, a women's gospel worker. Basically in the context of the States, I guess it's like a women's, I don't know what you would call it, ministry director or whatever. But basically I'm working specifically with women within the scheme, and a lot of what I've just said, a lot of my week looks like evangelism, discipleship, equipping women within the church and within the context of the scheme. So the schemes, I said this before, they're 52% single parent families, and 9 out of 10 of those families are single mums. So they're very, very matriarchal societies. Women kind of rule their roost a lot of the time. They say that women wear the pants, and that's kind of the situation in the schemes. And so I think it's really helpful, like when we're going in to plant a church, obviously we have male elders, male pastors and everything, but it's really helpful to have a women's worker, especially with a lot of these women who've had backgrounds of abuse and trauma and mental health. It's helpful to have a woman that's kind of specifically meeting for one-to-ones and discipleship with the women. So I'm going to show you a little video because I've been talking a lot. I can see some of us nodding off. So we're going to watch a video. This is a lady called Katie, and she came to faith, I want to say it was 4 years ago. She's got a really, just encouraging and a powerful testimony. And if you get the chance to meet Katie if you ever come over, she literally shines for Jesus. Jesus is pouring out of her, but it's just amazing to see the transformation in her life, and hopefully just kind of concretely says in her words what I've been trying to say over the last 10 minutes of what's going on within Scotland. There is subtitles on this one. You will need them because she's got a very strong Scottish accent, so hopefully you can read along if you don't understand her. But
I was born in Nifty. Family life was very up and down growing up. My dad was very abusive, violent towards my mum and me and my siblings. Then my mum and dad's life got extremely hard, going through the traveller income, security that comes with. Most of all, we lost the structure of life, and we rebelled big time. In 2008, I fell pregnant. I went into homeless accommodation. The shock of it just was like, well, I'm having a kid. Fears for my childhood was creeping up. And then I started with alcohol. Loads of bad choices, one after another, and nobody wanted to know me. Everybody avoided me at all costs. It was just a really horrible time in my life where I felt hopeless, despair. I was failing at parenting, I was failing at just being a person in society. I'd been going to the Catholic Church for over a year. I came out one day, says I prayed for the Lord to show me where I was going wrong. The following Sunday I was walking through the mission church doors, and I know it wasn't for my own ability, I know it was the Holy Spirit led. For the first time in my life I had peace and a joy that I could not describe, and at that time my life was still very much a shambles and had no reason for the joy that was in my heart, and that's how I know I became a Christian. The amount of neighbours who say to me,
It's amazing how you've changed, the change in the kids. People are actually going out the road for to come and speak to me now. It's a big change, and the kids notice it the most. I got approached after my baptism and got asked if I would be interested in an internship with 20 schemes. Through the internship, I would start being at the church with responsibility every day. I would start studying the Bible and theology. People for the schemes of Scotland just are so dead in their sin that they need this good news. If it wasn't for the good news of the gospel, I would still be dead in my sin. I would still be addicted to my drugs and my drink, and I can guarantee you I wouldn't have my kids now. I didn't understand that how would you have such a hard life for there to be a reason at the end of it. But the reason being is for to have the knowledge, have the credentials, for to serve the kingdom of Jesus, and for to point more people who has had a background as myself, just to get alongside them and point them to Jesus as much as they possibly can with the good news of the gospel.
Yeah, I love watching that every time. But I think the really cool thing, I will say, like, one of the really encouraging things about Katie is that when you meet her, and as she said in that video, like, everything about her life's changed, even the way that she looks. Like, she's a completely different person, and she's been transformed by Jesus. And people will come up to her often. I've been with her so many times where people come up and they say, "Oh, well done, Katie, you've done so well, like, I'm so proud of you." And she's the first person to say, "This is nothing to do with me." She's constantly bringing the glory back to the Lord, and she's, you know, it's not even about the church, it's not about, she's like, it's all because of Jesus and because of the gospel and the good news of Jesus. And I think that is, that's the vision of 20 Schemes as well. I even say that as I'm sharing this is nothing to do with 20 Schemes, it's nothing to do with these local churches. It's all to do with Jesus and his power and the way that he's at work in each of our lives, and it's just so encouraging to see that. So yeah, hopefully that encouraged our hearts, hearing that. So just a little bit of the kind of, geography lesson now. So 20 Schemes was started 11 years ago. The guy in the video who was wearing the beanie, he grew up in a scheme, and basically, long story, he's written a book if you're interested in reading it, but basically didn't hear the gospel, got involved in very serious crime, ended up in prison and drugs and all sorts. And when he came out of prison, he needed to move in with somebody so he could get an address, so that he could get a job and all that kind of stuff. And some Christians took him in and they shared Jesus with him, and his life was forever changed. He lived in Brazil for quite a lot of years and was doing ministry in Brazil, but the Lord called him back to Scotland, back to his roots, and he went to a church called Nidri Community Church. I'm going to try and use my laser. This is fun. Yeah. So it's in Edinburgh. It's here. So in a city in Scotland, and when he went to that church, it was basically within a scheme. It was a dying church of about, I want to say, 8 or 10 people. Everybody who was a member of that church lived outside, and they would drive in, and there was a lot of issues. They just got the windows done in the building, and within a week the local teenagers smashed them all up. The people understandably were terrified about going to church because their car windows were getting smashed and all this kind of stuff. They had a heart to reach a community, but were struggling to know how to do that. And so Mez called the Lord called Mez, wrong way around. The Lord called Mez to pastor this church. So he moved there probably over 15 years ago, maybe longer now. And basically one of the first things he did was he moved into the scheme with his family and encouraged some of the other members to do the same, and just faithfully started preaching the gospel, and people got saved, which is amazing, and the Lord's built that church. But he had the vision, I think it was always in his mind, he had the vision to start 20 Schemes, which was going to be church planting, revitalising over the whole of Scotland. I think he's very passionate guy as well, especially because of his background. So he knows, he looks at his own background, and he looks at so many people within the scheme. And as he said in that video, it's a crime that there's many people that aren't hearing within the United Kingdom, within the Western world, that aren't hearing about Jesus. And so yeah, now 11 years later, these are the churches, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are the established churches, which what I mean by that is that they are a local church that has their own pastor, their own eldership. 20 Schemes isn't a denomination. 20 Schemes is a network that helps to train and send, and but each one of these churches is an established local church in a different scheme in Scotland. We go on to the next slide. So, we'll go back a second. So I moved 8.5 years ago to Scotland to work with 20 Schemes. And when I first went, I went to Niddrie Community Church, where Mez was, and I did a year internship. And then the second year, me and a church planter and an Indigenous guy moved to the next scheme, which is called Bingham, Hope Church Bingham. And we were doing outreach there for a number of years, and then a church was planted there 4 years ago. And so for the last 8 years, 7 years, I've basically been doing women's ministry in the context of that church in Edinburgh. And we took on a local lady from the scheme, Caroline, and the last year especially year and a half was training and equipping her. And the Lord called me actually in September of last year to move to Glasgow. So this is kind of a new thing. So I was 8 years in Edinburgh, just moved to Glasgow. And so for the last 4 months, I've been based at a church called Hope Community Church Barlannick, which is on there in bold. That's kind of become like the hub now of the church planting in the West. It was planted 6 years ago. I've been there for the last 4 months, and I've been doing a bit of a mix of things. So kind of training with other women's workers in the west of Scotland, and ministry there, kind of getting to know the culture of Glasgow, and also a lot of this, going and sharing with churches, and basically raising funds and support for me to continue long-term in ministry. The plan is that when I go back after my trip to the States on Monday, I go back to Scotland, the plan is that I will then move to another church, another scheme, and that'll be, Lord willing, a long-term move. It'll be me and a church planter, potentially an intern, and we'll move in very similar to what we did in Bingham, and be part of a church plant there. So these are, if you're interested, these are a list of churches that have been revitalised in the last 11 years through 20 Schemes, and these are upcoming church plants. So as you can see, there's a lot going on, and that's all glory to the Lord. Like, it's very exciting as we see just all over the place churches are being planted and revitalised. Okay, we'll come back to that. Should we watch another video? Yeah, let's watch one more video. So this video is going to be more specifically about the work that's going on in the west of Scotland, which is the work that I'm involved in, and then I'll wrap stuff up after that and explain a bit about what I'm going to be doing, and then we'll have question and answers. But well done, you're doing very well. I know this is an information overload, so.
The west of Scotland is the best of Scotland.
You can't say that.
I know. Glasgow and the west is home to over a third of Scotland's people. Our two biggest football teams are based here. Rangers, traditionally Protestant, Celtic, traditionally Catholic. It's also world famous for shipbuilding, art and culture. But it's most famous for the straight-talking, fun-loving, banterous Glaswegian. Glasgow was once the knife crime capital of Europe, well, it's been voted Britain's friendliest city. So local comedian Kevin Bridges joked that it's the kind of place where we might stab you, but then we'd take you to the hospital afterwards. Glasgow too has a rich gospel heritage. 1500 years ago, our patron saint, St Mungo, gave the city the motto, "Let Glasgow flourish by the preaching of thy word and the praising of thy name." And Glasgow has been a place of great gospel ministry and great gospel mission. But today, the slogan of Glasgow has been shortened to just "Let Glasgow flourish." And very, very few of the people of Glasgow would now ever attend a gospel preaching church. And if this is all true of Glasgow and the West as a whole, then it's especially true of the housing schemes here. The West of Scotland is full of housing schemes, tower blocks, and working class villages or towns. In many ways, they're the very heartbeat of our culture, but they're also our places of greatest need. And as industry has declined, The darkness of addiction, family breakdown and struggle has grown in its wake. And if Christians has retreated to city centres or leafy suburbs, very few of the people of our schemes ever hear the gospel at all. So for the next 10 years, we at 20 Schemes have committed to focus, not exclusively, but primarily on Glasgow and the West. And so it's our aim really to do two simple things. We want to find places, we want to train people and pray that the Lord shines the light of the gospel in some of these dark communities again. 20 Schemes already helped us plant Hope Community Church Barlanark in the east end of Glasgow. That's really the base of our ongoing work here. But we've already had opportunities to start to work to plant or revitalise churches in Kilwinning, in Onthank, Kilmarnock, in Baillieston, other parts of Glasgow. And it seems every month new places are showing up on the radar. That means we're also working hard to train people for these places. So twice a month on Mondays we meet together as church planters to read books, to pray, to discuss how best to be better planters or revitalisers or pastors for these churches. We also have a preacher's breakfast once a month. Our women's workers gather once a month. We even have a time where we get together as full church planting families with kids and do some work together as what it's like to be ministry families. And then we've also got our own hub of Ragged School of Theology here in Glasgow, where some of our interns go, even some of our church members go, and to learn best how to grow in the Lord and reach out to the places around about us. Yeah, the people we have is always less than the places where we need people to go. And so we're really praying the Lord would provide a new generation of people, maybe people who are looking to enter full-time ministry, but people therefore who consider doing that in some of these needy communities in the west of Scotland. It'll be hard, but it'll be worth it. And we're really excited to see this new family grow of new and old Glaswegians, people working together to see the schemes of Glasgow and the West flourish again by the preaching of his word and the praising of his name.
Cool. So hopefully that gives you a little, bit of what Glasgow's like. It's quite a different culture to Edinburgh. I've been learning that since moving there 4 months ago. But there's a great need. As it said right at the end of that video, there's 97 schemes in the city centre of Glasgow alone, and then out with, there's just hundreds of schemes. So there's a lot of, he said, the opportunity is always more than the people, and I think this reminds me of the verse that Jesus says where the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few, and we see in that a lot, especially in the west of Scotland, that there is a great harvest and there's great opportunity really, so many places like popping up each week, but the workers are few, and so that is I said that at the beginning, but that's a huge prayer request, that the Lord would equip people to go. So I'll just finish by saying, so I haven't spoken loads about what I'm doing, sorry about that. You can ask that in your question time. But basically, moved to Glasgow 4 months ago. I've been in a situation, my funding shortfall's been quite low. I kind of came into 20 Schemes like 8 years ago through the back door. Shouldn't really be saying that. But before there was more of an official kind of, we need to have 80% of our funding before we go somewhere. So in some ways, moving from Edinburgh to Glasgow has been a really helpful time because it's almost given me this transition period, which has been good in so many ways. The Lord's been doing a lot in my heart during this. I'm ready to go and get back kind of full-time and being in the scheme and ministry, but it's been helpful to have this opportunity just to be able to travel and share about the work. Also to pray really specifically and seek the Lord as to where he wants me to go. It's very easy to just jump into somewhere where there's a great need. But me and Pete and some of the other directors of 20 Schemes are just really seeking the Lord as to his direction. So I was hoping before I came to the States we would have a decision. That's not quite the case. But there is two options. So I would just say if you remember to pray, just pray very specifically that the Lord will make that clear. He is doing that, I believe, but I just, would ask for your prayers. And then, Lord willing, if I leave and if I'm fully funded, then the next steps will be for me to look for accommodation in the scheme that the Lord's calling me, and along with a church planter to carry on doing ministry full-time for however the rest of my life. I don't know, who knows. Just to finish up before we have questions. So you've seen at the end of most of the videos, it says pray, give, come. That's something that we like to say a lot with 20 schemes, but often people say, well, you know, it's exciting to hear what the Lord's doing, but how can we help as a church far away in the States? How can we partner together and it's just great to build these relationships, that it's not just me coming and sharing, but these genuine, relationships that will hopefully go on long term. So I would invite you, if you feel led, first of all and most importantly, if you want to pray for the ministry of 20 Schemes, there's ways that you can do that. At the back, I've got a big QR code. If you scan that, it will take you to a way that you can get my monthly prayer updates. So they're short and sweet, but once a month I try and send out just an update of what the Lord's doing. So that's a way that you can be praying. Also, if you go on 20schemes.com/pray, you can sign up for like general 20 Schemes updates that they send out with just specific prayer requests. And if you don't like QR codes, come and speak to me afterwards, because there's a way that I can just get your contact details and pass on more information about how you can be praying for what the Lord's doing in Scotland and through 20 Schemes. Secondly, if you feel led, this is always the awkward bit, but if you do feel led to give financially, I just updated this before I spoke because I wanted to have the accurate details, but I currently have a monthly shortfall of $800 a month, which isn't that much. The Lord has been so gracious and faithful in the last months to provide in miraculous ways. I was trying to do the maths, and I think I was like, if 20 people give $40 a month, then that's me fully funded. So it's not a crazy target, which is amazing, because 6 months ago it was a crazy target. But if you do feel like you want to partner financially with the work of 20 Schemes, or if you just want to talk about what that looks like, then there's ways that you can do that. I also have prayer cards, I forgot to mention that, but this has, in the back, it's got information of just prayer points that you can be praying for me personally, and then at the front it's got a QR code again. We love our QR codes, which will send you to a page on the internet that you can sign up if you feel led to financially partner. And finally, last but not least, if you want to come and visit, there's a lot of ways that we like to have people come, and sometimes that's through whether churches here in the States are partnered with individuals and with church plants. We like to set up kind of like mission teams and vision trips, which is just opportunities to come for a week and to visit and to basically get a feel for what the Lord's doing there, to meet people, encourage people within these small church plants and revitalizations. There's a lot of opportunities for that. And then we also have like more long-term opportunities to come and serve, whether that's through doing internships or coming over as a gospel worker or a church planter. I don't want to call you away from here, because I know that West Virginia needs the gospel in so many ways as well. But if it is something that you want to talk more about and you feel like the Lord's really putting that on your heart, or you even just want to have conversations of what it looked like to come over to Scotland, then there's ways that we can talk about that as well. So that's everything. We've got 5 minutes. So thank you so much for just letting me be here and letting me come and share. And I don't know, I didn't mean to put it on that one, I promise you. Letting me come and share about the ministry. And I do want to say, I'm so grateful. It's been such a blessing to go to different churches in the States and just to see just genuine care and interest and just desire to see the gospel going out all over the world, and it really, really means a lot to come and be able to share that with you guys. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes. That's a really good question. Yeah, so at the minute there is only, so Inverness is a city there, and they've got one church plant that was planted a couple of years ago. I was actually speaking to somebody yesterday who was saying that they're planning to do a lot more. I think in the next 5 years they're trying to do a lot more work up in the north, but it's a lot harder up there. That is a big reason. There's a lot of schemes up there, but it's not as densely populated. It's kind of like the further north you go, the more rural it gets. But that's definitely something to be praying for. I think they're hoping that church that was planted will become almost like a hub as well for planting other churches up in the north of Scotland as well. But that's a very good question. Yeah. Anyone else? Don't worry if you don't. I know it's kind of awkward. Yeah.
How is the government as far as supporting or not supporting?
Yeah. In terms of ministry or people?
You get like the scheme ministry
Yeah, that's a good question.
that, or
Yeah, that's a good question, yeah. People ask that quite a lot. So the government, I would say in terms of general, are like doing a very, very good job of supporting people within the schemes, almost too good a job, that it means that people are in kind of cycles of poverty that it's hard for them to get out of that. In terms of supporting local church ministry, it's kind of hard. So there's a lot of ways, like the church I was at in Edinburgh, we partnered with the local doctor over the road, and we did like walking groups, and that was really helpful. But as soon as you start to kind of get grants and funding from the government, it really restricts opportunity to share the gospel. And so there definitely is ways, like there's some things that we've done and programs that we've done where we've got there's been kind of the overlap with government kind of help, and even them sending people, referring people, and vice versa. But it definitely is, it definitely makes it harder to be like gospel preaching when you've got grants coming from government, because they just restrict what you can do. They say, well, we're happy to help you, but don't talk about Jesus. And so obviously as 20 schemes, like we're very much like, we believe people's biggest needs is Jesus. Obviously we want to help with practical needs, and there's all sorts of ways that we're called to do that, but the biggest and greatest need is that people need the Lord. And so we try and be kind of careful and thoughtful about, what help we get in that sense. Does that make sense? Is that, yeah. Cool. Anyone else? Cool. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Emily. I was one of the few who raised their hand who was familiar with 20 Schemes. I heard Mez McConnell speak at a Together for the Gospel conference. It must have been a decade ago, and he was very passionate. And I was so excited about, just because he was excited, but to hear what the Lord is doing is so much more than what I imagined. And I'm so thankful for how the Lord is working in so many ways there in Scotland, and how this came about just for our church family. Pastor Jason McClanahan from Randolph Street in Charleston called and said, hey, I've got this young lady coming, and if you would be interested in having her share. And when he told me she was from 20 Schemes, we're like, yes, we want to know more about that. But his daughter was over in Scotland I think she lived with you? So for 2 months. So she was able to take one of those trips, and Jason and his wife went over for a couple weeks, and they got to see the work firsthand. And so that's really how that came about. And so maybe there may be some of you who are interested in that. And if that's the case, make sure you talk to Emily more before you leave tonight. I'm not going to preach, although I'm excited. But I wanted to read just a passage of Scripture. In fact, she mentioned it in her presentation, but after our board meeting with Missions 316, there's no affiliation between Mission 316 and 20 Schemes, but one of the greatest needs that we were talking about in our board meeting yesterday was just the laborers are few. And so I want to remind you of that tonight from the Word of God. And I'm looking at Luke, actually the end of chapter 9, going into chapter 10. And so maybe the Lord has burdened your heart tonight. So I just want you to hear the Word as we close. Luke 9:57 says, as they were going along the road, someone said to him, they were talking to Jesus, and said, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To another he said, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. And Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. Yet another said, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home. Jesus said to him, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." And just a series of people saying, "I will follow, but." And I don't want that to happen tonight. If the Lord is burdening your heart, there's going to be buts in the back of your mind, but this, but that. But if God is burdening your heart, I want you to just listen to the words of Jesus here and just to follow. But he goes on and says, "After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2, into every town and place where he himself was about to go. And he said to them, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest.'" And so just a reminder of the great need. It is still there today. It's there in Scotland. It's here in Appalachia, in the Mid-Ohio Valley. The need is great. And maybe you're here tonight. I'd be foolish not to at least say, if you're here tonight and you're wondering what the big deal is, why are people going? Why are people leaving home and to go into these other places? It's because of Jesus. And if you don't understand that, I'd love to talk to you more tonight. Maybe you've heard about the hope of the gospel, and you're like, what is that? We'd love to tell you more about the hope of the gospel as you leave.